let's get things going here so I can see your comments. Got a bunch of people coming in already, and without further ado, we never punish the people that are on time. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. So hello, Photo Racer. Hello, Eddie. Welcome, everyone. And let's talk about what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about getting tack sharp images in Lightroom Classic CC. So what is this whole tack sharp thing? Don't you do that in the camera? Isn't that something that you really don't have to worry about anymore? Well, yes and no. You should always achieve to get the best image you can out of your camera. That goes without saying, whether it's making sure the image is in focus, making sure you got a great lens that will keep things nice and sharp, but that's only part of the story. That's only like the entry level, getting a good image out of the camera. Because there's an inherent amount of sharpness that is lost from the process of transferring the image to the computer. And I don't mean the actual data transfer, I just mean going from a digital camera to your computer, there's going to be a slight amount of sharpness loss, especially if you're shooting in RAW. Here's why. Because when you're shooting in RAW, you're telling the camera, turn off everything. Don't do anything to my image. Don't apply any camera sharpening. Don't apply any camera color correction. Don't do anything. So that's where part of that sharpness is going to be lost, because what you're used to seeing maybe with a JPEG, you're not going to see that at all with a RAW file, because you told it to be in RAW. Therefore, you told the camera not to do anything to it. Leave it the way it is. So let me give you some examples of what happens. I'm going to switch over to my computer here. I've got several images open. These are all raw images that don't have anything done to them. So some of them might not look that great because I haven't done anything to them. I removed all the processing on purpose. However, when you bring in a raw file, by default, you don't do anything else to it. Lightroom applies some sharpening to it, basically to restore what you're used to seeing from a JPEG to the raw file. Here's what I mean by that. So I'm going to take this, this image that I shot. This is in Sweden, and I shot this years ago. So let's go ahead and take it over to the develop module. Now, when I take it over to the develop module and zoom out and we go to detail, we will see that there is an amount of sharpening applied to it already. And I'm going to hit reset on the image. And even when I hit reset on the image, meaning basically get rid of everything that I, Terry White, have done to it and put it back to its default, you can see that there's an amount of 40 applied to it. Now, this amount used to be 25 back in the camera processing days of before 4 and before 5, like version 3. It would apply only 25. But in the newer versions of Lightroom, the newer camera processing, the newer cameras, it applies 40 by default. So that's happening again. I hit reset, I'll hit it again. It applied that sharpening automatically. So if we were to zoom in on this image and we go to the clock face here, and I'm not professing that this is the best image in the world, but if we were to take it down to what 0 would be, meaning what the camera gave us, that's how much softer the edges get. That's for the folks that are saying, oh, I do that in my camera. I'm good. I have a great camera with a great lens. I shoot in RAW. That's 0. That's what you'd be getting in the capture process. So we're going to be talking about three processes for sharpening. The capture sharpening, and I'll talk about the other two when I get to them. I don't want to spoil it. All right, so the capture sharpening. So again, if I hit reset, it'll put it back to 40, and my image got a little sharper. That's awesome. Great. I love sharp images. People ask me all the time, wow, your image looks so sharp. How did you do that? And I say, I sharpened it because that's the truth. Even if I didn't touch that, Lightroom sharpened it for me. Now, I'm going to also take you through some presets. So right off the bat, there is a brand new sharpening preset called Sharpening. There's a folder for them. And notice there's a none. Why would there be a none? Why would you want to turn the sharpening off? So you can see it before and after. I can see that that's what none does. Now, when you go to light, you're not going to really see that much of a difference with the naked eye, although I can, especially around the edge at the top here, I can really see it when I click on light. But when I go from none to, let's say, heavy, You see a big difference right off the bat. So you can, of course, use these presets to jump around and get you there. Or you can, of course, use the slider to get anything in between. Maybe heavies, not enough. Well, that would be too much. When you start seeing artifacts, when you start seeing grain, when you start seeing halos, you've gone too far. Back off the sharpening a bit. But you can go all the way from 0 up to, again, around 40, which is what it defaults to, or go a little higher if your image can take it without introducing artifacts. So right off the bat, capture sharpening is happening, whether you want to admit it or not. If you want to say, I'm great, my camera's great, click, ooh, that's sharp. If you shot in RAW, this is happening to your images anyway. All right, now, there used to be another set of sharpening presets, and I've turned mine back on. There's one for sharpen faces and one for sharpen scenic. They used to be under the general category, but if you are in a later version of Lightroom, a newer version of Lightroom, those are gone. Well, they're not gone, they're hidden, they're turned off. So I'm going to show you how to turn those back on. Go to your presets, go to manage presets, and when you go to manage presets, they will be unchecked. So if I were to show it the way it normally looks, you would see the new ones, you would see your existing user ones, but those older ones are gone. I like the older one. There's one in particular I like, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute. So I'm going to turn it back on. Go to manage presets, turn back. You can turn them all on if you want to get back all those presets, but I'm going to turn back on the one for general for sure. And that will give me two new ones, Sharpen Faces and Sharpen Scenic. What are those for? Let's click out of this, zoom out, and let's go over to a face. Let's go to a person. Let's click on Krista here. Now, this image is, if I were to zoom in on this image, it is definitely in focus. It's sharp. It's out of the box, ready to go, because it got that amount of 40 sharpening right off the bat. Cool. If I were to turn that off or turn it down, the image is still in focus. It's just not as sharp. So again, if I hit reset, see how much sharper the eye got just by going from 0 to the built-in default of 40. Now that's great, but this is a person. This is a female subject. And typically on female subjects, we don't want to sharpen the skin. We don't want to make the skin look plastic either. But we don't want to apply extra sharpening to the skin. We don't want the skin to be more sharp than it should be. So that's why I like the old preset for Sharpen Faces, because it did something. It turned on the masking. Now you get to go do this manually, but I would always do it just by clicking the preset, and you can make your own preset, by the way. I would click the preset, and it would turn on the masking for me. Now it took the sharpening down a little bit, took it down to 35. Took the radius to 1.4, which I usually don't mess with. I usually don't mess with the detail too much. But the masking is key, because this is the Lightroom secret. This is why I love sharpening in Lightroom or Camera Raw, because of this masking feature. It intelligently figures out what things should be sharp or not. Here's how you can see it. If you hold down your Option or Alt key and you click or drag on that slider, you will then see what's being sharpened. The areas in white are being sharpened. The areas in black are not being sharpened. So if you said, and look at what it did automatically. It sharpens the eyes, the eyebrows, the lips, the jewelry, the tower behind her, but not the skin. If I wanted to do it even more, I could crank it more to the right, so it really just zeroes in on those areas of sharpening that I would want. If I go all the way to the left, that means sharpen everything. Everything's white, everything gets sharpened. That's why it's off by default for most things, because if you're sharpening landscape, there's no areas you want to protect. You want it all sharpened. But if you're sharpening a face, a person, especially a female subject, or feminine subject, you definitely want to crank up the masking so that it only sharpens those areas that are in white. And it does this automatically. That's why I love the masking. That's why I love the face preset that was in the previous versions of Lightroom Classic. All right, so if I let go, I think it was going to put it on 60, but I'll keep it on 80. Zoom in. And I apply more sharpening. Let's say I don't like 35. 35 is not enough. If I apply more, just those areas get sharp versus the skin. And by the way, another tip is you definitely want to be on a 1-to-1 or higher to be able to see the sharpening. So if you say, hey, I need to sharpen this image, first thing you should do is zoom in to a 1-to-1 ratio so you can actually see what's going on. So at a 1-to-1, I can see the eye get sharpened, but not the skin. I can see those details starting to happen. So that's what I love about the masking feature and the older preset for sharpened faces. Now the next, I talked about, those are what we're going to call capture sharpening. Can you shoot with camera raw with a smartphone? You absolutely can if you use the Lightroom camera on your smartphone and your smartphone's compatible. You can shoot in raw. All right, so the next thing. So that was capture sharpening. What comes into the computer sharpens automatically. You want to take it further. You want to do faces. Great. Number 2 is called creative sharpening. Creative sharpening says that, hey, I not only want to do faces and get that taken care of, but there are areas in the image that I want to make even sharper. I don't want to make her eyes more sharper, or maybe I do, but I don't want to make her skin more sharper. I don't want the lips to be any more sharper. I don't want the hair to be any sharper. I just want specific areas sharpening. So that's when we head over to the adjustment brush. The adjustment brush has presets. So for example, if I were just trying to adjust the exposure in certain areas, maybe I want to lighten up the glove, then I could do an exposure preset and it would lighten or darken that area. I'm going to undo that. You can also switch it to sharpness. And what that will do is it will turn off everything else in the adjustment brush and just turn on the sharpening. Which is right here. I'm going to crank it up a little bit more. We're going to go to a 1-to-1. I'm going to move it down over this jewelry. And again, I can start to paint in my own sharpening for the jewelry. Now, you're probably saying, well, I don't really see that much happening. Like that doesn't really look like it's doing a whole lot, Terry, until you say, well, what would the opposite be? We turn it down. Look at how blurry that gets. We turn it up. That's how much sharper it gets. So you are controlling specific areas, especially you can see it in here. You're controlling specific areas with what we call, or what I like to refer to as creative sharpening. I'm picking bits and pieces of the image that I want to draw your attention to, that I want to pop. Jewelry, eyes, teeth maybe, things that you want sharper or in the image. If it were a car, maybe a specific part of the car I'd want sharper. So that's creative sharpening. And that's, again, done with the adjustment brush, and you can apply as many points as you need and adjust specific areas of the image. So again, I would zoom in, I would come over here, I would start to sharpen up this earring. And again, it's only doing it over the areas I paint on. And of course, if we were to turn that down now, we could see it get out of focus, and I can see any areas I might have missed. There we go. And then of course, I can go ahead and turn that sharpening right back on and even higher to get a sharper earring. So for those who say, I do it great in my camera, you're not doing that in your camera. I mean, there's not, you can do shallow depth of field, but you can't pick and choose areas of the image to be sharp. That can only be done in post. All right. Next up, and last but not least, is output sharpening. Just like I said before, where you lose a little bit of sharpness in, as opposite, creative blurring, yes. As you lose a little bit of sharpness when the image is brought in, that's why sharpening is turned on by default. You also lose a little bit of sharpness when you're outputting the image, when you're exporting the image out. So Lightroom gives you ways to bring that sharpening back in for the output process as well. So if I were to say, hey, I want to make a print, and by the way, let me show you one more capture sharpening example. This is one that I love to show because it shows it well. Let's go to develop. And let's go to detail. And again, that's on the 40 that comes in by default. But if we were to say none, that's what I would have gotten from the camera if Lightroom didn't do anything to it. It's a subtle difference, but it can make all the difference in the world, especially when you're going to blow the image up. You're going to print it bigger. You're going to do things like this. You're going to zoom in or crop to specific areas. You really want to be able to have your images nice and tack sharp as you're working on those images close in. All right, so anyway, let's say now I want to print this image. If I were to go print it, which I would make some more adjustments first, but if I were to go print this image, I could either print it from Lightroom or export it and print it, through a service. So if I were to choose export, in the export process, there is output sharpening. That's there for a reason, because we know that when you export an image, you're going to lose some of that sharpening just via the export process. So you can say sharpen for screen, matte paper, glossy paper, because again, this was designed for outputting to be printed. So if I'm going to print this on matte paper, I can even choose the amount, a low amount of sharpening, standard amount of sharpening, high amount of sharpening. Unfortunately, you don't get to see it until you do the print. So you might do some tests first to see which one you like better. Now, I used to do all my social media exports on Sharpen for Screen and Sharpen Standard. And sometimes, depending on how big or small the image is going to be, that might be too much. In other words, it looks over sharpened. So in that case, you might do screen, you might start on a low. Just give it a little bit more sharpening for screen, and then there you go. All right, does edit in Photoshop and return to Lightroom reduce the sharpening? It shouldn't, because if you edit in Photoshop from the Lightroom image, it should take the amount of sharpening that you gave it over to Photoshop and bring it back. But I am qualifying that with it shouldn't. All right, last but not least, if we do a print, and we were to print this image, and we go all the way down, because normally you'd be at the top. You scroll all the way down, and you will see print sharpening. It's there for a reason. Same reason for the export. So if I'm printing this to my own printer, I'm not doing an export. I'm printing directly to the printer attached to my computer. So I'm going to do the sharpening here. Same thing, standard, low or high, and what type of media, matte or glossy, are you printing to? And it will apply the sharpening during the print process so that you get that sharp image on paper that you were looking at on screen. All right, so I hope I have answered that age-old question of, why do I need to sharpen? My camera does it. Because you do. If you want your images to look the way they should look, and you're going to post-process them, then they should be sharpened during the post-processing process. Now, people will often ask, well, should I sharpen them in Photoshop or, in Last or any part of that? And I would say with most things, do what works best for you. I tend to do it in Lightroom. I tend to do it early, not later, simply so I won't forget. If you don't have a problem forgetting, then do it at the end. You can certainly do it at any point of the process. You can certainly do it over in Photoshop. There's no law that says you have to do it in Lightroom, but we're talking about Lightroom here, so we're going to show how to do it in Lightroom. All right, so with that said, I am out of time. I want to thank you guys for joining me. Happy New Year, since it's my first stream of the year on the Lightroom channel. And thanks for watching this, and we will catch you on the next one. If you're watching the replay, thanks for watching the replay. Cheers, everybody.